Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves from Stories from the Arabian Nights by Laurence Housman, published 1907, with some original transitions added. When they had settled in the next night, the Sultan turned expectantly to Scheherazade. "I am ready for the story you promised me," he said. Scheherazade smiled and began. Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, Part 1. In a town in Persia lived two brothers named Qasim and Ali Baba, between whom their father at his death had left what little property he possessed equally divided. Qasim, however, having married the heiress of a rich merchant, became soon after his marriage the owner of a fine shop, together with several pieces of land, and was in consequence, through no effort of his own, the most considerable merchant in town. Ali Baba, on the other hand, was married to one as poor as himself, and having no other means of gaining a livelihood, he used to go every day into the forest to cut wood, and lading therewith the 3 asses which were his sole stock in trade, would then hawk it about the streets for sale. One day, while he was at work within the skirts of the forest, Ali Baba saw advancing towards him across the open a large company of horsemen, and fearing from their appearance that they might be robbers, he left his asses to their own devices, and sought safety for himself in the lower branches of a large tree which grew in the close overshadowing of a precipitous rock. Almost immediately it became evident that this very rock was the goal toward which the troop was bound, for having arrived, they alighted instantly from their horses, and took down, each man of them, a sack which seemed by its weight and form to be filled with gold. There could no longer be any doubt that they were robbers. Ali Baba counted 40 of them. Just as he had done so, the one nearest to him, who seemed to be their chief, advanced toward the rock, and in a low but distinct voice uttered the 2 words, "Open, Sesame." Immediately the rock opened like a door, the captain and his men passed in, and the rock closed behind them. For a long while Ali Baba waited, not daring to descend from his hiding place lest they should come out and catch him in the act. But at last, when the waiting had grown almost unbearable, his patience was rewarded. The door in the rock opened, and out came the 40 men, their captain leading them. When the last of them was through, "Shut, Sesame," said the captain, and immediately the face of the rock closed together as before. Then they all mounted their horses and rode away. As soon as he felt sure that they were not returning, Ali Baba came down from the tree and made his way at once to that part of the rock where he had seen the captain and his men enter. And there, at the word, "Open, Sesame," a door suddenly revealed itself and opened. Ali Baba had expected to find a dark and gloomy cavern. Great was his astonishment, therefore, when he perceived a spacious and vaulted chamber lighted from above through a fissure in the rock, and there spread out before him lay treasures in profusion, bales of merchandise, silks, carpets, brocades, and above all, gold and silver lying in loose heaps or in sacks piled one upon another. He did not take long to consider what he should do. Disregarding the silver and the gold that lay loose, he brought to the mouth of the cave as many sacks of gold as he thought his 3 asses might carry, and having loaded them on and covered them with wood so that they might not be seen, he closed the rock by the utterance of the magic words which he had learned, and departed for the town, a well-satisfied man. When he got home, he drove his asses into a small court, and shutting the gates carefully, he took off the wood that covered the bags and carried them in to his wife. She, discovering them to be full of gold, feared that her husband had stolen them, and began sorrowfully to reproach him. But Ali Baba soon put her mind at rest on that score, and having poured all the gold into a great heap upon the floor, he sat down at her side to consider how well it looked. Soon his wife, poor careful body, must needs begin counting it over piece by piece. Ali Baba let her go on for a while, but before long the sight set him laughing. "Wife," said he, "you will never make an end of it that way. The best thing to do is to dig a hole and bury it. Then we shall be sure that it is not slipping through our fingers." "That will do well enough," said his wife, "but it would be better first to have the measure of it. So, while you dig the hole, I will go round to Kasim's and borrow a measure small enough to give us an exact reckoning." "Do as you will," answered her husband, "but see that you keep the thing secret." Off went Ali Baba's wife to her brother-in-law's house. Kasim was from home, so she begged of his wife the loan of a small measure, naming for choice the smallest. "This," said the sister-in-law, wondering. Knowing Ali Baba's poverty, she was all the more curious to find out for what kind of grain so small a measure could be needed. So, before bringing it, she covered all the bottom with lard, and giving it to Ali Baba's wife, told her to be sure and be quick in returning it. The other, promising to restore it punctually, made haste to get home, and there, finding the hole dug for its reception, she started to measure the money into it. First, she set the measure upon the heap, then she filled it, then she carried it to the hole, and so she continued till the last measure was counted. Then, leaving Ali Baba to finish the burying, she carried back the measure with all haste to her sister-in-law, returning thanks for the loan. No sooner was her back turned than Kasim's wife looked at the bottom of the measure, and there, to her astonishment, she saw, sticking to the lard, a gold coin. "What?" she cried, her heart filled with envy. "Is Ali Baba so rich that he needs a measure for his gold? Where, then, I would know, has the miserable wretch obtained it?" She waited with impatience for her husband's return, and as soon as he came in, she began to jeer at him. "You think yourself rich," said she, "but Ali Baba is richer. You count your gold by the piece, but Ali Baba does not count, he measures it. In comparison to Ali Baba, we are but grubs and groundlings." Having thus riddled him to the top of her bent in order to provoke his curiosity, she told him the story of the borrowed measure, of her own stratagem, and of its result. Kasim, instead of being pleased at Ali Baba's sudden prosperity, grew furiously jealous. Not a wink could he sleep all night for thinking of it. The next morning before sunrise, he went to his brother's house. "Ali Baba," said he, "what do you mean by pretending to be poor, when all this time you are scooping up gold by the quart?" "Brother," said Ali Baba, "explain your meaning." "My meaning shall be plain," cried Kasim, displaying the telltale coin. "How many more pieces have you like this that my wife found sticking to the bottom of the measure yesterday?" Ali Baba, perceiving that the intervention of wives had made further concealment useless, told his brother the true facts of the case, and offered him, as an inducement for keeping the secret, an equal share of the treasure. "That is the least that I have the right to expect," answered Kasim haughtily. "It is further necessary that you should tell me exactly where the treasure lies, that I may, if need be, test the truth of your story. Otherwise, I shall find it my duty to denounce you to the authorities." Ali Baba, having a clear conscience, had little fear of Kasim's threats, but out of pure good nature he gave him all the information he desired, not forgetting to instruct him in the words which would give him free passage into the cave and out again. Kasim, who had thus secured all he had come for, lost no time in putting his project into execution. Intent on possessing himself of all the treasures which yet remained, he set off the next morning before daybreak, taking with him 10 mules laden with empty crates. Arrived before the cave, he recalled the words which his brother had taught him. No sooner was "Open, sesame!" said. Then the door in the rock lay wide enough for him to pass through, and when he had entered it, shut again. If the simple soul of Ali Baba had found delight in the riches of the cavern, greater still was the exultation of a greedy nature like Cassim's. Intoxicated with the wealth that lay before his eyes, he had no thought but to gather together with all speed as much treasure as the 10 mules could carry. And so, having exhausted himself with heavy labor and avaricious excitement, he suddenly found, on returning to the door, that he had forgotten the key that opened it. Up and down and in and out through the mazes of his brain, he chased the missing word. Barley and maize and rice, he thought of them all, but of sesame never once, because his mind had become dark to the revealing light of heaven. And so the door stayed fast, holding him prisoner in the cave, where to his fate, undeserving of pity, we leave him. Toward noon the robbers returned, and saw standing about the rock the 10 mules laden with crates. At this they were greatly surprised, and began to search with suspicion amongst the surrounding crannies and undergrowth. Finding no one there, they drew their swords and advanced cautiously toward the cave, where, upon the captain's pronouncement of the magic word, the door immediately fell open. Cassim, who from within had heard the trampling of horses, had now no doubt that the robbers were arrived and that his hour was come. Resolved, however, to make one last effort at escape, he stood ready by the door, and no sooner had the opening word been uttered than he sprang forth with such violence that he threw the captain to the ground. But his attempt was vain. Before he could break through, he was mercilessly hacked down by the swords of the robber band. With their fears thus verified, the robbers anxiously entered the cave to view the traces of its late visitant. There they saw piled by the door the treasure which Cassim had sought to carry away. But while restoring this to its place, they failed altogether to detect the earlier loss which Ali Baba had caused them. Reckoning, however, that as one had discovered the secret of entry, others also might know of it, they determined to leave an example for any who might venture thither on a similar errand, and, having quartered the body of Cassim, they disposed it at the entrance in a manner most calculated to strike horror into the heart of the beholder. Then, closing the door of the cave, they rode away in the search of fresh exploits and plunder.
Cassim got what he deserved, snarled the Sultan. But what happened when Ali Baba discovered his body? Surely he wouldn't have been foolish enough to try to bury it. It would be dangerous, certainly, replied Scheherazade. But foolish? A man clever enough to outwit robbers once may be clever enough to outwit them again. But that is a tale in and of itself. Gladly will I tell it to you, if you let me live for one more night.